An important factor when it comes to options pricing is Vega. What is Vega? Well, Vega is one of the 4 primary option Greeks, and Vega gives us the volatility risk of an options position. Vega tells you how an increase or decrease in implied volatility, how that affects your options position. This is the 4th video in this series, Learn the Option Greeks. Of course, today we're talking about Vega, but we've already covered 3 of the other primary option Greeks on camera. We've done delta, theta, and gamma in previous videos. Today, we're wrapping up the 4 primary option Greeks with Vega. A brief recap of what the Greeks are. The option Greeks are important metrics that help you monitor your current options positions and manage your portfolio. The Greeks, they're typically not used in trade selection. For trade selection, you need to be much more focused on things like liquidity, probability of profit, implied volatility rank, risk versus reward, max loss, max profit, return on capital, those kinds of metrics. The Greeks, again, are used to help monitor your current open options positions. And yes, I know Vega is not the name of an actual Greek letter, unlike delta, theta, and gamma, right? There's no Greek letter Vega, but why they call it Vega, who knows? I imagine they call it Vega because it starts with V, and Vega deals with volatility. And that's kind of how things go with delta. You think of delta as the directional risk of a trade. Theta is that time component to a trade, right? Vega is that volatility risk of a trade. So what is Vega? Well, Vega measures how much an options price will change when IV changes by 1%. So if implied volatility of the underlying stock that you're buying or selling the option on, if that IV increases by 1%, how will that affect the options pricing? What if it decreases by 1%? How will that affect the options pricing? So long options, they have positive Vega, while short options have negative Vega. And this kind of makes sense. We've already discussed this. Even though we haven't discussed Vega, I've already kind of hammered this point home that typically with long options, you want volatility to increase over the life of the trade. And of course, with short options, which is primarily what I'm focused on, especially with short option selling strategies like the wheel strategy, we want IV to decrease, right? So long options have positive Vega, short options have negative Vega. And if we go to the options chain, let me open up TASTYTRADE here, and I'm going to go to an options chain. Let's go to the Microsoft options chain, and I'll go 54 DTE. And again, the option Greeks are normally not used for trade selection, so I don't normally have a column for something like Vega. So this column here that I have set to open interest for purposes of this video, I will set it to Vega right now. And you can see the values for Vega here on the call side are all positive. The value for Vega here on the put side are also all positive because they assume you're going to buy calls and puts when you're looking at things on the options chain. Obviously, if you sell a call or a put, then these positive Vega numbers are actually all negative in actuality. Your positional Vega will actually be negative in that case. So how Vega works, let's do the at the money call. Let's imagine I buy this at the money call here for Microsoft. Right now, the Vega value for that is 66. Now, what does that mean? Well, that means if the implied volatility rank of Microsoft increases by 1 percentage point, the value of this option, the price of this option, will rise by 66 cents, all other factors being equal. So if I move my head out of the way, you can see that the IV for Microsoft right now in this options chain, the IV, is 26.2%. Let's just call it 26%, right? If it increases to 27%, the price of my option will increase by 66 cents. And conversely, if the IV went from 26% to 25%, it dropped a percentage point, then obviously my option will lose value by 66 cents. Naturally, all of this would be exactly the opposite if instead of being long the call, I was short the call, right? An increase in volatility would actually hurt me, so my option would gain value of 66 cents, but that's a negative if I'm on the short side of that option, right? And obviously, if the IV decreased by 1%, the option would lose value by 66 cents, just like it did with the long option, but that's a good thing if I'm on the short side of that trade. So you got to think of everything in reverse if you're short the option rather than long the option. So what does it mean when you have a high Vega or a low Vega? Well, a high Vega means that an option's price is highly sensitive to changes in IV. And a low Vega, of course, means that an options price is less sensitive to changes in IV. So let's imagine that a trader purchases an option with a Vega of 10 and an IV of the underlying of 20%. If the IV of the underlying increases by 1% to 21%, that price of his option will also increase by 10 cents. And again, if we take the other side of this trade, so if instead the trader sold the option instead of buying it, that 1% increase in IV would actually hurt his position, since an option seller wants the price of the option to go down, not go up, right? We want to sell the option at a high price and buy it back to close at a low price. So IV decrease is what we're looking for if we're short the option. And as always, long options are helped by an increase in volatility, all other factors being equal, and short options are helped by a decrease in volatility, all other factors being equal. Now, if I go back to TASTYTRADE here and I look at my positions tab here, let me move my head out of the way. I do actually have a column for Vega monitoring my positions. Now, I don't actually really look at my Vega numbers all that often, even though I have them here. Typically, Delta. Delta's the one I'm really worried about. I'm always checking the deltas on my positions because Delta really tells me whether I'm winning or losing on a trade. I also will occasionally take a look at theta values, but I'm less concerned about theta value of individual positions. I'm much more concerned about my overall portfolio's theta value. For example, if my overall portfolio has a total theta value of 50 positive theta, right? That means that every day that goes by, every single day, I should make $50 from just the passage of time, from theta on my portfolio. The Vega numbers I'm less concerned about because volatility, you really don't know where volatility is going from one day to the next. It may rise, it may go down, who knows? So I very rarely look at the Vega of my positions, and I never, like in the trade tab here, if I may actually go to the options chain, I never actually look at Vega. I'd actually put that back to open interest. But imagine I sell a 26 delta put here on Microsoft. I don't even have Vega listed here as part of the review and send, but of course I could. If you actually wanted to look at Vega as part of the review and send area, what you could do, go to your trade display settings. You could add Vega to this area here at the bottom. You can see that a short 26 delta put on Microsoft would actually have a positional Vega value of negative 54, essentially. What that means is that a 1% increase in volatility would actually cause my option here to actually increase in value by $54, but that's a negative for me. That's why they put the negative here in front of the positional Vega value. Basically, what they're implying here is that negative Vega value means that Vega, a rise in volatility, would be a negative for my P&L. So, should you monitor your Vega? We discussed this when we talked about Gamma as well, and just like Gamma, while I think it's absolutely crucial that every options trader knows their delta and their theta numbers, knowing your Gamma and your Vega, much less important. Really, what is important to know is just the concept of Vega and how it affects options pricing. You need to know that with long options, a volatility increase is a good thing, a volatility decrease is a bad thing. And with short options, it's the opposite. A volatility increase is a bad thing, and a volatility decrease is a good thing for short options. And that's, to me, really all I need to know, and I think all you need to know. Knowing your actual Vega numbers, I don't think is all that important. If you want to track Vega, it's fine to do so, just like with Gamma. It's fine to do so. If you want to track those numbers, you want to look at them, there's nothing wrong with it. But for me, there's so many other metrics that, I might want to track. There's only so many things you can fit onto the positions tab of your trade platform. If I go back to TASTYTRADE here, and I go back to the positions tab here, right? There's only so many columns of information, right? And I had to make some choices here. I wouldn't mind having some other information here. For example, I didn't put beta weighted deltas, which we haven't talked about. I haven't put IV rank if I wanted IV rank here. I haven't put things like capital requirement or P&L for the year. I've got a P&L day, P&L since open. There's a lot of other columns of information, but I can't fit any more columns. I've got the maximum number of columns for this area on my screen, right? So I've got to make some choices, right? I got to pick and choose what's really important and what's not. And honestly, Gamma and Vega, they don't make the cut. They're really much less important than those other columns that I'm displaying on my positions tab right now. Again, the main thing to know about Vega is a rise in volatility helps long options and hurts short options. A fall in volatility hurts long options, helps short options, and that is why it is always preferable to sell options. Like those of us running the wheel strategy, we primarily sell options. It's always preferable to sell options when volatility is at the high end of its range, because if it's at the high end of its range, it's much more likely to come down, right? It's going to revert back to its mean, to its average volatility where it likes to hang out. And that contraction, that decrease in volatility, helps short options. And that kind of gives us an edge. If we always sell our options when volatility is high and that volatility tends to contract, it tends to come back down, that makes us a little money. So that was just a very quick and cursory overview of Vega. We didn't spend a lot of time on Vega, certainly not as much time on Vega as we did much more in-depth discussions about Delta especially, and even Theta and Gamma. Vega is very straightforward to understand. There's really not much to discuss there. And again, Vega's not something that most options traders really spend a lot of time monitoring every day. Again, now that we've covered Delta, Theta, Gamma, and Vega on camera, always know your Delta for sure. There's no excuse not to always know the Delta of your positions. Theta is something you should also keep track with, especially your overall Theta numbers, as far as the overall Theta number for your portfolio as a whole. As far as Gamma and Vega, you need to know what they are. You need to know the dangers associated with Gamma risk, for example, and you also need to know how volatility affects long options versus short options. But knowing those actual numbers, for me, I'm not that concerned with it. If you want a more in-depth discussion on Delta, Theta, Gamma, and Vega, I cover all 4 of the primary option Greeks in my book, The Super Wheel Option Strategy, available on Amazon. It's available in paperback, hardback, and now in a Kindle edition. There's a link in the description below. Peace, guys.